Давайте поприветствуем, поаплодируем. Хей-хей. У нас будет Диего. Диего приехал к нам из Лондона. Он работает в компании Samsung, и он будет сегодня рассказывать про PWA. Давайте еще раз поприветствуем Диего. Диего.
Hello. So, thank you for being here. You're probably going to have to bear with me. I'm trying out this new way of presentation. It's the first time that I'm trying it out, just presenting from the phone, because it makes it so much better to travel with just your phone instead of having to hook up the computer. So, yes, good. Is it already afternoon? Good afternoon. My name is Diego Gonzalez. I work for Samsung Internet in the UK. I'm originally from Costa Rica. I'm a Google developer expert in web technologies, and as I mentioned, I work for the Samsung Internet team. Now, I would like to start by first making a brief mention of what Samsung Internet is. Okay, so how many of you have heard about Samsung Internet? Okay, that's good, because then I still have a job to do. Basically, Samsung Internet is the company's web browser. And yes, Samsung, we do have a web browser. It's pretty much, depending on the region of the world that you're talking about, we're generally the third most used mobile web browser in the world. It can go up from 2% of mobile usage to around 20% in certain countries. We are the most used browser on Samsung Galaxy devices. We are the default browser on Galaxy devices. And we are the second most popular Android browser after Chrome. Now, if you put these numbers in perspective, then you're going to notice that they're huge, and that's why it's important to be testing your web experiences on Samsung Internet browser. Okay. Now, to answer the question of why another browser, which is something that we get a lot. Basically, we believe that we can provide the best UX for our users. And as Samsung, we have a very differentiated view of what makes a good user experience. And it starts pretty much with making sure that the browser is taking care of you, and it allows you a more private and secure browsing. So for example, we combine certain of the hardware capabilities of our devices into the browser, allowing you to bypass login screens with biometric authentication, and also incorporating certain new features and be first to market. For example, when a couple of years ago, we were first to market with what was immersive web, bringing it, followed then by Mozilla, Chrome, and certain other browsers. So we believe that by allowing you to, for example, install ad blockers, then we are giving you a more private and a better user experience than other browsers. Now, the browser itself is built over Chromium, and I believe the current stable version is based on M71. Samsung is one of the biggest contributors to the Chromium open source project, and because it is, then we actually want to bring some of the innovation that we're working on the browser to different devices. And this contribution, it actually takes the shape of, in some ways, web standards. And we are deeply involved in the Immersive Web Working Group. We are deeply involved with the effort in progressive web apps and other technologies that are already supported because they come from Chromium as well. Now, if we take a look at the type of devices that we've had in the recent years. Let's take, and this is just Samsung specific, but we can have devices, foldables like the Galaxy Fold. We have devices that came out earlier this year like DS10, like DS9. We want to make sure that the web experiences that you are building work incredibly good across all of these devices. But when you're a manufacturer like Samsung, the whole idea of having a web browser goes a bit more into a really wide range of devices, because we have a browser also that's working on phones, tablets, TVs, fridges, etc., etc. And of course, the idea is if you develop an experience, it should work exactly the same or very similar on each of every device. Now, this kind of happens already by accident, we can kind of say, and it's thanks to web standards. This is an example of an application that I did a couple years ago. This is how it looks on the Galaxy Fold in the front. Bubble.pictures, it's pretty much a 360 image viewer. A couple of years ago, we would have cameras that would be capable of taking 360 pictures, and the problem was that when you wanted to show these pictures to other people, it was very difficult because nobody had a way of seeing this. So we created a PWA, and we got that it works on regular mobile devices. It works, of course, on desktop browsers, and we actually found out by accident when we were testing that it was also working on pretty much smartwatches. So this is a type of things that we really like about the web and the things that we really like about developing with standard technologies. And actually, this is an experience that's working with WebGL in the back. Of course, it's limited and it progressively enhances depending on the capabilities that your device has. So in a similar fashion, we can say that the dream would be, of course, to take some of the technologies that we are working on and make them available across every single device that you have. So think about from foldables all the way to your appliances. And yes, I don't see why you wouldn't want a progressive web app on your fridge. Now, before going into what are the new things that are coming to progressive web apps, let's do a recap in case we have people that are interested in the technology or that are fairly new to it. A progressive web app, we can think about it as a website that is enhanced to work as a user would expect a native application. So this definition of what a native application is or how it should work, it really varies, but there are some things, for example, the access to notifications, the ability of an application to work even if there's no connectivity. And the way that you generally achieve this is by making sure that your website is served on a secure connection, making sure that it has a service worker, and adding a manifest file. So every single website that's already out there, as long as it's complying with these three things, it's taking advantage of some or all the benefits that you have of a progressive web app. And we're going to take a brief deep dive into what this would mean, starting by, of course, the secure connection. If you're delivering your website over HTTPS, then you're pretty much protecting the integrity of your website because you're minimizing or just outright removing the man-in-the-middle attacks. You're protecting the privacy of the user. And possibly the most important thing here is that most newer web APIs, think about immersive web, think about now geolocation, think about even service worker, which is required for progressive web apps, require you to serve your assets and your website from an HTTPS connection. But then again, it's 2019. I would assume that this is kind of like what we are doing anyway with our websites already. So if we move to the second one, which would be that we have a service worker and, okay. We have a service worker. The service worker is going to be a proxy that will allow us to intercept the network connections. And this has a lot of very interesting capabilities, like, for example, access to the cache storage API. So we could cache some resources and make sure that they are available even if we don't have connectivity. We can make network requests with the fetch API, and we can persist data using IndexedDB. This would be the mechanism that will allow us to get the application to work offline. And the final part of what makes a PWA is the manifest file. And the manifest file is quite interesting because it not only provides information about the web application that you want to get to the user, it's a JSON file. And inside this JSON file, you're going to get information like the name, author, icons that you might want to use when you install this application into your home screen. Something that's been added very recently is the possibility of screenshots. So if you wanted to offer a store-like experience right from the browser, you're able to do it with the screenshots. You can have also colors and orientation of the application itself. Now, some of the questions that we get from a lot of people is, why would we want a progressive web app? Let's say that apart from the things that we've been advertising already ever since the start of progressive web apps, which is the fact that you can have an icon on the home screen and treat it more like a proper application. We have offline functionality, which is the one that's enabled by the service worker. And we are able to have now push notifications, which is something that application developers are really interested in because it provides re-engagement into their experience. Even if you don't implement all of the 3 necessary steps for a PWA, you have some added value into implementing some of these. And it's interesting to see that many developers and many companies, they come to us and they tell us, we already have an application that's working on iOS. We already have an application that's working on Android. So what is the benefit of implementing some of these things into our website? And again, added value is that you're going to get responsive design. And this responsive design is the one that's going to allow your application to work on everything from a foldable device to a wearable to an appliance. You have faster loading times because if you've already visited this application, this website, then you are going to see that some of these resources are cached and they're just being served up from cache instead of going back and fetching them. We have enhanced customization throughout the manifest, and this is something that more and more browsers are getting behind. As an example, Samsung Internet puts the color of your Chrome of the browser Chrome, depending on the theme color that you have. And it's also being replicated, for example, on desktop. Browsers like Vivaldi, they also take the tabs and the Chrome interface, and they put it in the color based on your branding that's on the theme. Also, Microsoft recently announced that the new Edge is able to now put the color of the theme and change the color of the application bar as well. You're protecting the integrity of your website because you're browsing through HTTPS, and you have, again, compatibility with the newer web API. So all of these are things that you get for free, even if you don't implement a whole set of progressive web app technologies. But what about applications? Because most of the things that I'm talking about, they're already present in applications. They already have an icon on the home screen, and even more, they have an application in the application drawer of the operating system. They already work offline. They already have access to push notifications. They, of course, load fast because all the assets are installed. They have access to many hardware-specific capabilities, some of which the web still doesn't have access. If you're thinking about contacts, if you're thinking about access to SMS messages. And they're easily discoverable on an application store, which is generally what we want. But we can argue that to date, every single one of these capabilities has come or is coming in the very near future to the web platform. So, yes. Now, except for the easy discoverability in application stores, we can see that progressive web apps already can have an icon on the home screen and a bit more. They can work offline. They have access to push notifications. They are fast. And they have access to different device capabilities. So think about Bluetooth, Web NFC is coming, Web USB, and more capabilities are being added to the web platform. And possibly something that I really like to say is that this is not a competition. Native technologies are good for certain scenarios. Progressive web applications are good for other scenarios. The fact is that we're bridging more and more the gap between the differences that these two technologies have. Now, you also get some other advantages that are quite interesting when we're talking about progressive web apps. The first one is new types of interaction and engagement with your brand or your product or the workflow that your user has with your properties. We have a different type of discoverability. We have, and these two are linked, the cost and availability of the user's data and the size of the user's storage, because we're not all running the latest and greatest Android or iOS device, and many users are constantly battling with the size that they have in their phones. So if we look about the interaction and engagement with the brand or the product, we can start thinking about, we can start thinking about trying to trigger the user to install or get involved with a progressive web app once they've done something meaningful with our website. So if we are in a shopping experience, once the user does the checkout, or if you are, for example, in an airline experience, once the user has booked the tickets, then you might want to prompt them to install this into their phone. And this is interesting because if you think about an application for a supermarket or an application for an airline, unless you actually travel a lot, it's not something that you really appreciate having 50, 60 megs on your phone that's being taking space. So it might make sense to just install the PWA because it's a smaller size and it pretty much would do the same. And again, this is pretty much enabled by the capabilities that you have on your website. The other advantage is the one that's related with discoverability. And even though we're talking about the fact that it's not common to see progressive web apps in the application store, you have a very easy to share and easy to find way with the URL. Since these are pretty much just websites, you can take the URL, you can send it over messaging, you can encode it in a QR code, you can do many different ways, put it to broadcast over a beacon, and you can enable the discoverability of your apps in ways that go beyond just the application store. There are also proposals to make it easier to share, and right now it's being discussed the idea of sharing with a bundle your offline PWA to another phone. These are things that are being currently discussed. And possibly the best is that there is no gatekeeping and no walled garden. So even if your application has some content that might be blocked or might seem as not allowed in certain application stores, then this is just the web, it's open, you can just publish it and it's still going to be working. Nothing like a company telling you, oh, and I'm sorry, I just crashed here, so let me just reopen the application. I guess this is the exciting part of actually testing new ways of doing stuff. Okay. But apart from all the advantages that you're getting with PWAs, possibly the biggest one that I would say, and the one that's most attractive, is the fact that you have reach. And you have huge reach. Because if we're thinking about all these browsers that you see on screen, Samsung Internet, Firefox, the new Edge, Chrome, Opera, Safari, and UC browser. These are browsers that to date at least support Service Worker or parts of Service Worker and the manifest file. So some of the functionalities that you are embedding into your website are going to work in every single device that has one of these browsers. And possibly the most important, you're getting all the support with just one code base that progressively adapts to, ooh. Okay, so now I'm getting a bit more. Let's try it again. Okay, so till here is what we all know and love about progressive web apps. It's kind of like the state of the market, let's say, until fairly recent, right? So now to the real topic of the presentation, which is what happens after the continuation of the PWA story. Let's see. Okay, I went to the wrong slide. I am very sorry. Basically, we've seen that progressive web apps allow us to integrate and take the best of native applications and the best of the web. And at the moment, they share some things. Like, for example, the icon on the home screen. They share certain things. But if we can be... Oof, see, I was a bit nervous that I was going to crash again. But as we can see, and let's be completely honest, on a platform level, they're not quite there as first-class citizen. The reason for this is because until very, very recently, the fact that you get a PWA in your home screen does not necessarily mean that it's in the application drawer. And the application drawer is when you go into your operating system and you see all the list of the apps that are installed. You didn't have it in the system applications list once you go into settings. You can't manage notifications. It did not appear in the share menu of the operating system. The browser was branding notifications that you were getting from the PWA, and even in the home screen, you would get a browser badge over the icon of your application. And nobody wants a Samsung Internet or Edge or Chrome badge on top of their icon. So this is why we wanted to bring these two even closer together. We wanted to make the differences between the native technologies and the web technologies, let's say, smaller, and thus the concept of Web APK pretty much came to be. And what Web APK is pretty much the browser generating an APK and installing this PWA in your phone. The way that it manages updates is that whenever it detects a change in the manifest file, which is the one that defines, remember, how your application is going to be viewed and displayed on the operating system, whenever it detects a change in the manifest file, it just updates silently. It supports Android intent filters, so you're still able to say, okay, I want parts of my PWA to be managed by the web browser, and I want parts of my PWA to be managed by the PWA itself. And it adds permission and storage management right into the operating system. So you can see how this is bringing the concept of the progressive web app more close to what we expect from a native application. Now, this is the case for Samsung Internet. It's very, very similar in other browsers, but basically, if you have a web app manifest, which is the JSON file that has a short name, icons, at least an icon that has a resolution of 192 pixels, you have a start URL, you have the display as full screen, standalone, or minimal UI. This is the one that pretty much allows you to take the Chrome of the browser away from the PWA to make it look more like a native application. It's served over HTTPS, and it has a service worker that has a fetch event. Then your browser is going to put this little icon, we call it the add to home screen. And this is going to be displayed on the URL bar. Once you click on this icon, it's going to take this and put an icon on your home screen. It's adding a link, pretty much. It's like a bookmark that it's on your home screen instead of your bookmarks. And if you're thinking that that's not enough, it's because it is not enough. That's why if you take all the criteria that we had from PWA, and you are running a phone, in this case a Samsung phone, that its Android version is higher than N, then the icon that's going to appear is a different one, and it's going to have this download type of icon. And this is prompting you to install the application and making sure that the PWA the browser will create a APK from out of the PWA and will install it. And then you'll have access to having the application on the application drawer list and all the advantages that we were seeing before. Also, this does not work, and it happens to me a lot because I forget that I installed some PWAs, but this does not work if you already have the application installed. It just won't show anything. Now, this is how the button will look. You can see here I'm going again to bubble.pictures, and if you're on a Samsung device and you're running Samsung Internet, then once you go to this URL, you can see how the browser itself is prompting you with this little icon over here that prompts you to install. So on Galaxy devices, the experience goes like this. You click on this icon, and you're going to get a notification that has from the browser that says the name of the application and says that it's installing. Once it downloaded all the files and it installed, then the notification is going to change to installed. And in this case, I have it to not add the application to my home screen because that's how the operating system is configured. But you can see here, okay, let's see, 1 notification, 2 notifications, and then you can see how the application is going to appear, and this is in the applications list of the operating system. And if I go into settings, I can see that now I have access to information of battery usage, mobile data that's consumed as if it were a traditional application. Now, this looks a bit different than other platforms, and the concept here is just to illustrate to you how independent of if you're on a desktop computer using, in this case, Edge or Chrome, you still get some sort of similar prompt. And here you can see, and you've probably noticed that if you go to certain websites that comply with having manifest, service worker, and HTTPS, then you're going to get a circle with a plus, and it kind of animates. It says install, and then it goes back up. It works exactly the same. I click here, it's going to prompt me to install, and it's going to be integrated into the start menu of the Windows operating system. And if I want to uninstall it, then I just go into Control Panel, Uninstall Apps, and it's pretty much behaving exactly the same as a native app. In this case, this is latest version of Firefox. They are not installing, they're not generating the web APK yet. I'm pretty sure they're going to be doing it soon. But you do get a similar icon when you comply with this, which is this one over here. Again, it's the Add to Home screen. Firefox is going to put a link to your home screen. But there's the question of what about the application store? And I know that we actually know that this is something that's very important for developers. It's the way that the current paradigm is telling us that we look for an application. So we're actually looking into how can we enable this. And there are lots of ways. Not all of them are the nicest ones. But now I would like to just kind of see some hands here in the audience. Who thinks that being present on an app store is important? Okay, well, that's good. Not many of you think that the applications are important. You're making my job easier. That's for sure. Basically, there are some ways that certain companies are enabling to get your PWA into an application store. Just to mention a bit, Google has a concept where you can wrap your PWA into something that they're calling a TWA, as if that were not confusing at all. And then you can take the TWA and submit it to the Play Store. So your application would be listed and it would go to the Play Store. Microsoft back in the day was doing something where they were crawling the web and searching for websites that would have the manifest, the service worker, and they would be automatically ingesting them into the Microsoft Store. I believe they're not doing that anymore. But you can see how we're actually all trying to get your PWAs into the application store for the 5 of you that thought that it's important to have an application in the store. So, of course, if we're talking about Samsung, we actually do have an application, and it's the Galaxy Store. The way that we are enabling your PWAs to be submitted into the Galaxy Store is quite manual, to be honest. But at the moment, this is something that we are just trying out. We're testing out. We are starting with the US, I believe, and I'm not sure if in Korea. So US, for sure, you would go into the application store. And we have now this new category that's called web applications. And here you can see which are the listed PWAs that you have on the store. So once you click on it, since it's just pretty much an experience that's based on the browser, immediately opens the PWA and you can start using it. We're trying to see if there is interest in this, and that's why if you have a PWA or you have a website that you would like to submit to the Galaxy Store, then I would encourage you to do so, because it will help us to identify the how many users want this, and then hopefully convince more people that we need more PWAs in the application stores. So the downsides at the moment is that we actually do need a license agreement because of the use of certain assets that you would be providing. For example, the icons, the screenshots, basically the same things that you need for an application store. But we have some ideas of how we can make this even better. I can't talk about this at the moment, but hopefully we can announce something soon. There will be a variety of ways of doing it soon, but for the moment, it's as easy as just sending an email. That's it. So you can just send an email to pwasupport@samsung.com. We will ask some information of your PWA information, and then we will make sure that it is on the Galaxy Store. It's very manual, it's very tedious, and we're looking to automate it in some way. Trust me, I get all these emails. So the question that you might have is, you might have a website. How do you get started? How can you take advantage of some of these advantages that you have with PWA? And I'm doing it now in a way that if you're interested in just trying the technology, I'm going to put it very easy for you, because instead of diving into code and talking about very technical things, I want you to think that maybe you have a website, maybe this is something that you might be interested in, you might want to try, but maybe you don't want to go through all the hassle of learning these technologies, so how can you make this in an easier way? Two things that we get asked very often. First, is there any way to get a consistent look and feel with the platform that we currently are? Because we all know that if you create a web experience and you have a button or a form or a select, they're not exactly the best looking controls out there if you compare it to the native controls that Windows, Mac, Android has. So, and the second one is to properly build the PWA. So I'm just going to give you a small tip. If you have a website and maybe you want to make sure that it looks right at home on Samsung devices, then Samsung introduced last year this concept of One UI. So remember when they laughed at Samsung, because I laughed at Samsung back in the day as well. I didn't work for them, but it was funny. TouchWiz. It was terrible. It was not very nice. Then we migrated to Samsung Experience. Looked a bit better, but now we are putting a lot more attention, and we recently announced the second version of One UI. So One UI is the way that your operating system will look on Samsung devices. It was actually the first one to introduce dark mode for applications. And this is quite exciting because the phone actually looks pretty decent. We actually worked this year in replicating the One UI styles and making sure they're available for web properties. So now we have One UI Web, which pretty much uses, it allows you to create a theme because we're underlaying just using custom properties. We have new layout options, just using CSS Flex, Grid, and Subgrid. We have automatic dark mode detection, and this is based on the media query prefers color scheme. So the same way that your applications change the theme to dark or light, depending on if the operating system is light or dark, your websites can now do this. And this is already built into the One UI Web. And it's accessible. We are making sure that at least we're complying with a AA level WCAG. Now, the controls that we have to date are these. This is how native UI would look in Samsung, and this is how a web UI can look in Samsung. Now, what's interesting here is this is just a CSS file, a set of CSS files. So think about, you might have your website. When you go on a Samsung device, you can pretty much identify and put it here. So it kind of looks similar to what you would expect on a Samsung device. But if you're opening this on a Windows machine, then you can just pretty much take the CSS file, swap it for a CSS file that recreates the Fluent design, and your application is exactly the same, but it looks different and it looks more coherent with the operating system. So that's actually quite exciting. That's actually quite cool. We've enabled as well the creation of themes, because maybe you want to keep kind of like the look and feel of the Samsung One UI, but you want to brand it with your own colors. So you can go to samsunginter.net/OneUI themes, and you're able to change all the colors to create your own theme based on custom properties. And there was a screenshot there that I actually forgot to put, but no worries. And the other part is the getting started properly with PWAs. What I would recommend is if you just want to try out the technology and get started, this is an open source project. It's led by Microsoft. We've actually been collaborating with them to get some features into the PWA Builder. URL is pwabuilder.com. And you can see how you will put a URL, and I guess the screen is not enough density to see the text, but basically it's going to give you a description of this first column is manifest. So what do you need in the manifest to comply with being a PWA, service worker, and then security. So it could be completely bad, as in you don't have any of these implemented, but if that's the case, it's not all lost, because it guides you actually in a very simple way of just put the name of the application, put how you would like this application to be called on the home screen, define which is the start URL for your website, define which are the colors that you would want, and you pretty much just create the manifest. It has even this area which is for images. So in images, you would define which are the icons that you want to appear. In this case, you can see how Bubble has these icons, and this was not created with PWA Builder, but since Bubble already had the manifest and it's already ingesting all the information, it's giving you an access to the preview of the code that's generating, and then it gives you access to service worker, and all the options that you might want to have. You might want to do something like, for example, Amazon. If you go into the Amazon application and you don't have any connectivity, what Amazon does is that they put a page of a puppy, a dog, and they just cycle through sad dogs because you don't have connection. This would be a case of an offline page. You just have a page that is appearing on your application when there's no connectivity. It's possibly the most simple way of creating an offline experience. And then again, it's not very engaging. You can create an offline copy of certain pages. You can create automatically a service worker that whenever the user is online browsing, it will cache the pages that the user saw. And then if there's no connectivity, it will retrieve them from cache. There are plenty of options that you can start playing here with. And again, you're getting the preview of the code that's generating in case you want to delve or pretty much just change some of the code here as well. This is the interesting part. When you get to the last step, you can pretty much just decide to create your PWA, and you have several options. First one, this one is the one that says Progressive Web App. You're just going to get a zip file that has the manifest and the service worker. And you would just include them. It will tell you, add a link to this file as the manifest, add a link to this script as the service worker, and it will just generate it, and that's it. You have a progressive web app just by adding these two files and the information that's needed. But something that's possibly a bit more interesting is the inclusion of these tiles that are beneath. And this is something that we actually worked with Microsoft on to enable the creation of an APK that you can then submit to the Galaxy Store or to the Microsoft Store. In this case, if you click here, Windows, it'll guide you through creating I believe it's and don't trust me on this one, but I believe it's an APPX, the extension that Microsoft needs. In the case of the Galaxy Store, it's an APK, so this will generate the APK, and you can just send it to us. And it also has some other options if you want to take that PWA and get the necessary files to start working on it on Xcode if you're on a Mac platform, et cetera, or you want to submit it to the application store. In this case, the one that I'm interested here is the Samsung one. So PWAs are available through the browser on Samsung devices. However, you can pretty much submit your PWA to the Galaxy Store by submitting your package. And this is once I went through the process and I downloaded. You can see here I have the manifest, which is the JSON file. I have the APK, and I have another file, another folder that has the source for the manifest worker. And that's pretty much it. It's an easy way if you want to kind of tip your toe and see if it's something for you. Anyway, you're already going to start having advantages from browsing the web this way. So let's try to summarize, because I know I've given you a lot of information. I know that you might be aware of some of these concepts, but what is the whole idea of the story after just adding the PWA to your home screen? If we're thinking about now, well, we're trying to focus on enhancing discoverability, basically trying to get your PWAs, because we know that that's something that many of you, including 5 of you in this audience, want. You want your PWAs in the application store. We're trying to provide the best-in-class user experience for PWAs, and this is at least the Samsung story of it. We were the first to market with the install, generating the web APK. We were the first to market with the add to home screen, and we really want to get your feedback on what do you want from us, from the browser perspective, to enable in order to get you building progressive web apps. And in this case, it's not only Samsung, but Samsung is the only company I can talk for. We need to be educating as well developers and users about progressive web apps, because it's a different concept, it's a different paradigm. Users are not used to the fact that they can pretty much just get an application from the browser without having to go through the friction that involves going to the application store, searching this, looking for maybe 3 applications that have the same icon, but they're fake, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can just get it from the browser, and that's something that we still need to educate users about. What's coming next? And this is quite interesting. We have maybe expanding to different platforms. And remember how the dream I shared in the initial slide is that we can even be on your fridge. We can even be on your smartwatch. At the moment, for example, Samsung smartwatches run Tizen. So there's a discussion. Should we enable progressive web apps on Tizen platform? That would enable your website that hopefully would progressively enhance to be seen on a screen like this. And that's interesting, because then you're pretty much with the same code base, you're expanding to a whole new different platform. Something, we also have the concept of, for example, expanding to progressive web apps on immersive web browsers. And immersive web browsers that are out there, Helios from Magic Leap, Samsung Internet for Gear VR from Samsung, the Oculus browser on the Oculus platform. Can we have these type of integration in these platforms? We actually are already discussing with some people from Magic Leap and the Immersive Web Working Group on the concept of 3D fav icons. The same way that Microsoft is doing with Windows mixed reality icons, that you get a GLTF file, you put it as a 3D model, that instead of having just a window that looks boring, you can have an icon, something with depth that represents your application. This is, I think I already mentioned the one that's next, which is expanding to more stores. And here, is it interesting for you to have compatibility of PWAs in Tizen on Wear OS? And this one would be on Google's part, on Oculus, if we're talking about PWAs for XR devices. And last but not least, and this is one that we have to really be very careful, is narrowing the gap with the set of features that are still available on native technologies that are not yet available on web. And here are the ones that I was mentioning before: contacts, SMS, raw clipboard access. That sounds kind of scary, right? Imagine if any web developer can access the content that you have on your clipboard. So all of these are being discussed. It's a project that's called at the moment Project Fugu. It's pretty much web capabilities. There's some very cool things there, like, for example, badges. Imagine having an icon that can have a badge if you have a notification. That's pretty dope. But you controlling the notification and you controlling the number and separation on tabs depending on the operating system. This is all being discussed at the moment. So you can see we're bridging the gap. Hopefully we will have more advanced capabilities with native technologies, but we are aware that this comes with a lot of responsibilities, and that's why we as web browser vendors are working with other web browser vendors to make sure that this is respectful of your privacy and made with security in mind as well. So if you're interested in any of these and you would like to try how it works on Samsung devices, you can go to these URLs and download Samsung Internet Stable or Samsung Internet Beta. They both work for any Android device. You don't have to have a Samsung device in order to test how these browsers work. And I believe this is where we part ways. So thank you very much for listening, and please let me know if there's any questions or interest that you have in the technology.
Ребят, ну и по традиции можно задавать вопросы на русском, и их попытаются перевести. Ваши вопросы? Questions? На русском, на английском? Попытайся на английском.
Thank you, Diego. It was an awesome presentation, and my question is, during the presentation you mentioned the word foldable. I know wearable devices, mobile devices, tablets, phones, but what is a foldable? Is it some new branch of evolution?
Yes, this is a foldable device. So the idea is that you can just pretty much, you open it and you have certain experiences, and if you close it, then you can have another experience here. But the fact that the web page is reacting to how the phone is, to the state of the phone, is interesting for us because well, at the moment, Samsung has foldable devices. Huawei, I believe, has upcoming foldable devices. Motorola just announced a foldable device, the Motorola Razr. Samsung's going to have a new foldable device, hopefully next year. So we are working as well, collaborating with Microsoft, Intel. There's a lot of interest on how do you define certain regions on the screen, because Microsoft has some foldable devices coming next year. How does the operating system manage where the keyboard is and not? How does your website behave? How do you take your website if you have a 90-degree angle? All these type of questions.
Makes sense. Thank you. It's a really interesting topic. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Next questions.
as I understood, to add an app on, for instance, Samsung Store, you just have to write an email with some information and send an APK, yes?
Send an APK, yes. Yeah, that hopefully came out of your PWA.
Okay. And my question is about security. Is there any credential system or some security system which observe the site that it has the right authorization? It's not a clone. Well, maybe I am just a random guy who sent an application which is a clone of a popular site, and it's just. But the purpose of my application is just to steal data, pretending to be a real site.
Yes. At the moment, we're currently looking at incorporating a lot of the questions that are coming out, not only of security. The whole idea of having a repo of PWAs that we can share with other browser vendors and make sure that, for example, even if it's a real site that gets somehow hijacked and then it has all the permissions that you have given to this website, is there any type of kill switch that we can have so we can just indicate to every single browser that has this PWA that came from, let's say, the Galaxy Store, that this has been hijacked, that there's a security issue? We're thinking about it. At the moment, that's why the process is very manual, because we need to get a legal department, we need to get the license agreement, and we need to make the right verifications. And again, at the moment, it's completely manual. We're thinking on how can we automate this and make it possibly comply with some of the security measures that the Galaxy Store has in this case.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Есть еще вопросы? Да, по-русски, да.
Also, sorry, I need to give these away. So one for you and one for you.
Хорошо. Спасибо за лекцию, очень интересно. Подскажите, пожалуйста, на каких платформах, в каких браузерах поддерживаются уведомления? Потому что, насколько я знаю, в iOS не поддерживаются пуши. А вот интересно, в других браузерах, которые вы показывали, как вообще это реализовано?
Thank you so much for your lecture. There is a question about notifications, if any browsers or applications can work with them, because iOS doesn't, you said?
Specifications, the
Yeah.
proper specification of service worker, manifest.
Push notifications.
Push notifications. So regarding push notifications, I haven't checked in iOS. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't work on iOS, because iOS has been a bit slower in adapting the specification, the implementation of service worker. Even though I believe that they are supporting service worker and manifest files. So let's say that in iOS devices, the experience might not be best as it is in Chrome, Samsung Internet, Firefox that already support the push notification. But I haven't really tried on iOS devices.
Thank you, Diego. It was very interesting.
You're welcome.
My question is, which application in your store is most popular, which support the PWA technology?
Application in which store? The one that's for
Samsung app.
the Galaxy Store?
The Galaxy Store, yeah.
Oof, to be honest, I don't know. That's some information. I have no idea which would be the most popular application on the Galaxy Store. I know that if we're talking about progressive web apps that are on the store, at the moment we have one partner that is in Galaxy Store in the States, which is FRVR, and they have 26 PWAs, which are all games. So I wouldn't say that they're the most popular because they're the only type of applications, and that's why we're trying to get more people, because that's a lot of valuable information. Once we know what type of applications developers are submitting, then we can tailor the experience better inside the browser or inside the application store. But properly, which is the best application, and I have no idea.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Давайте последний вопросик. Есть какой-нибудь? Да.
Here for you. And
Thank you for your presentation. Which information do you collect about application in your store? How many downloads, maybe?
at the moment, the information that we are requiring is pretty much the information that's already in the manifest file. Name of the application, description. Again, the idea of why we're asking for the email is because we need to get a license agreement for the usage of some of these, of some of the data that you're providing to us. But that's actually a very good question on the application side. Once the PWA is on the App Store, what type of information does the developer have? Yeah, I have no idea. I have no idea, and it's very interesting because we recently launched this, and Samsung Developers Conference was a month and a half ago, and it's only available in the US. But I can get back to you because now I'm actually intrigued what type of information do developers get, which is, I guess, very useful. But at the moment, I don't know because
I know that Play Store collects by itself information about how many views and downloads, but you give it to developer site. Yes?
Okay, I would say, and again, I'm not really sure, I would say it's similar because we have the information, for example, of Samsung Internet, because it's our application that we know how many people, which regions. I'm assuming that it would be a similar experience to a native experience, but I haven't tried it myself, and I actually need to go to the States to try it because I can't access it in the UK because it's only launched in the US. But I'll definitely get back to you on that one because it's proper information that developers will want to know. Again, it's very, very new. I haven't tried it since it's based in the US properly, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ega. Давайте поаплодируем. Последний вопрос. Last questions.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask, is there going to be any integrations with the popular apps like social networks? Are they going to be rerouted on your platform so that everyone can launch it?
There's already, when you talk about integration, is it integration into the store or integration into the browser? Because at least Twitter, Instagram, Starbucks, they already have PWAs, and they're already popping out in the web APK install. I'm actually using not the native versions of the application, I'm just using the PWAs, and they're already there.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you very
Давайте
much.
поаплодируем, да. Спасибо.